In the barrel this week, we're boldly going to a new time in the history of the Federation and talking about Star Trek Discovery. This week in Fandom Roulette. Hey everyone, welcome to Fandom Roulette. I'm Joe.
And I'm Cody.
So hey Cody, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing well. So what nerdy stuff have you been getting up to as of late?
I've started working out, but
nice.
Working out is no fun by itself, so I've actually been playing on my DS, and I've been replaying through Bravely Default.
What is that?
It is an RPG made by Square Enix that is not a Final Fantasy game.
Okay.
But it is a Final Fantasy game.
Interesting. Hey, they made other things outside of Final Fantasy games.
It's right, but
yeah.
What I really like about this game is its fighting mechanics. It's a turn-based RPG,
okay,
like usual.
Yeah.
But you can do what's called default and defend and save up your turns.
Okay.
And then you can brave, which you can burn through those turns to like make more than one move per turn.
Sure.
So a lot of combat ends up being like, okay, if I can, lose a couple turns by braving to do this like super cool combo and do a ton of damage, or I need to hit defense here because because the enemy can do the exact same thing.
Interesting.
They can brave and default. So there's a lot of cool mechanics at play.
What's the like leveling trees like? Because I think that was always the thing that kind of turned me off of Final Fantasy games. Like my friend wanted me to play 10 really bad, and I started playing it, and then I got to my first level up like tree, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I can do this, my friend.
So you level up, and you actually just have jobs. So
okay.
And you can freely switch between any job at any given time. But what's neat is when you level up in a certain job, you can have basically a sub job attached to it. Okay. So you have like a double combo. So my one character is a knight and does a lot of like physical defensive abilities and attacks. But I also gave him the white mage sub-tree. So he's kind of like a paladin.
Okay.
So that's really neat because you can kind of custom build everybody. The story's kind of pretty, typical for a JRPG. But otherwise it was... Yeah, you got to save the 4 crystals.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's less numbers. I guess it's a DS game, so they didn't have as much space to play with, did they?
I mean, I'm not sure the game's not, technologically brilliant, but, it's fun. It's fun for what it is. What about you? What have you been doing?
So, I have started to read the super-duper Marvel event, Secret Wars.
Nice. Which
is, of course, a play on the name Secret Wars from the 80s, which was sort of a big crossover Marvel event where this creature named the Beyonder created this world that he called Battle World. And he brought all the most popular heroes and villains from the time to all punch each other. And I've heard it described as like comic book characters punching one another. But people did interesting things with it. And then this one is written by Jonathan Hickman, which the most impressive aspect about it is it's kind of culminating like a 6-year story that he started like way back when he was writing the Fantastic Four. And he's been working on this for quite a while.
Huh.
And it was insanity. I read through his Avengers run. It was utter insanity and amazing and brilliant. And then everything goes wrong. And then next thing you know, you are in Battle World where everything is controlled by the God Emperor Doom.
Cool.
And if you know anything about me, I absolutely love Dr. Doom. I think he's one of the best characters that's ever been written ever.
Nice.
I love him. Everything about him is so great. So the fact that he's this god who built this weird, crazy Game of Thrones style Marvel universe is just so cool to me. One of the things is there's this wall on the one border of his realm, and if you're found guilty of a crime, then you're sent there and you are given a gauntlet with a blade on it, and then what you do is you are supposed to slide down and you have to survive for as long as you can against the Marvel Zombie Universe, the Annihilation Wave from the Fantastic Four, and Ultron robots. And you have to survive as long as you can, and it's your valor is based on how long you survived before you were completely decimated, and it's a lot of fun. It's some of the weirdest, coolest stuff. He lives in this place called Doomsguard, which is Asgard combined with Latveria, and all of the Thors and all of the multiverses are his private police force.
Nice.
So yeah, it's pretty great, and I'm really enjoying it. Jonathan Hickman is a really fun writer who understands his characters really well, and it's been a fun read.
Nice.
So yeah. So this week, I wanted to talk about like a new thing. It's kind of hot off the presses.
Yeah.
At least when we're recording. It's only about a week old now. We watched the pilot episode of Star Trek Discovery, which is the new long-form Star Trek series being produced by CBS and was produced by Alex Kurtzman and Brian Fuller. And so, before we begin, I think we need to talk a little bit about our knowledge or our relationship to the series, because there was something about this particular aspect of fandom that I thought was kind of interesting, and I wanted to kind of bring this up. So, Cody, what is your experience with Star Trek?
Well, I'll be real. I did not grow up with Star Trek. Mm-hmm. The best I got was an occasional episode here or there that may have been on TV.
Sure.
I watched the reboot movies. I guess they're reboots or something?
Yeah,
or
they're like
reimaginings.
They're like soft reboots with a new timeline. Yeah. And I'm sure even saying that will probably get some people upset.
Sure.
But yeah.
I watched the first two. I did not see the most recent one.
Cool.
And that's kind of it. I know my fiance grew up with Next Generation, so I've heard some things. Like
sure.
I now know what a Klingon is.
Okay.
I didn't growing up.
Yeah, for sure.
Very limited.
Okay. And
what about you?
So in 2009 or 10 or whenever that reboot movie came out, my friend sat me down and made me watch it because I had like no interest in
sounds like
Star Trek whatsoever.
Sounds like a crime that like someone could be charged for.
Yeah, and so I had, growing up, I had seen Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock, and then an occasional TOS episode here or there. So I watched the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and I enjoyed it well enough. I didn't fall in love with it. I didn't, see what everyone was talking about. I chose not to watch Into Darkness, because I think that was sort of at peak Benedict Cumberbatch saturation for me. Where I was like, he was in literally 5 movies that year.
Yeah. And
I was like, no, I cannot do it. I cannot deal with you in my Star Trek movie right now. So I skipped that one, and then I heard a lot of people weren't super keen on that one. And then kind of out of nowhere, I saw Star Trek Beyond with some friends who were going to see it. I wasn't doing anything that evening, so I met them up at the movie theater, and I absolutely loved it.
You nerd.
And I loved it for a couple of reasons. The first reason was that the story felt very, very small. So, in the first movie, they blow up Vulcan, right? And they're going to blow up Earth. And then I heard in the second one, there's, a couple of, almost, planet blowing up events. But in the third one, the story is very, very small. The story is the Enterprise crash lands on a planet.
Cool. Everyone's
kind of broken up into these little smaller teams. So there's the team of the crew, and it's Uhura. There is Spock and Bones, and they're just trying to survive on this planet. And then there's Kirk, Chekhov, and a third person they're trying to survive. And then Scotty and a native alien. And I absolutely loved it. And then when I was watching reviews of it and reading reviews of it, a lot of things that people were saying was the reason that they liked it was it just kind of was the first movie to feel like a big budget episode of Star Trek. And so that inspired me. I was like, I just kind of want to check this show out now. So I watched all the original series, and I'm about halfway through Next Generation. I'm about halfway through season 3 at the moment. And when I saw this, I was incredibly curious about it. And so I'm not suggesting that I'm an expert by any means, but I know enough, and I kind of understand the philosophy of the show and things like that. So by no means am I a super fan who could tell you the specs and details of every sort of different thing, but I kind of understand, or at least I like to think I understand, where Roddenberry and his crew were coming from when they created Star Trek, and kind of watched how it has evolved over time and things like that. So I was really curious about this because I've heard a lot of people say that the biggest crimes of like literally any Star Trek movie is Star Trek is kind of designed to be on the small screen. It's designed to be smaller, more episodic shows that have discussions about philosophy and our place in the universe and our role in the world and being a good person and this and that and the other thing. And it's really hard to do that in a movie, especially because when people see sci-fi, they want to see shooting and ships fighting each other
and aliens
and things like that, right? So a lot of people say, like, you know, the small screen is the place for Star Trek because that allows you to do stories like that, you know, those like 40-minute morality plays, basically.
Okay.
So I was excited because this is for the first time able to sort of engage with Star Trek right away from the beginning.
Nice.
So yeah,
I have to ask you a question though.
Yeah.
Since you saw the original,
sure.
I'm gonna take this quote from Weird Al.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite captain?
Oh boy. So I'm still very much in the throes of Next Generation. I think that at the moment this is hard. Man. So
starting strong.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people misremember Kirk.
Sure.
Because everyone talks about him as this like big womanizing stud.
Dude, he's got a bad feeling about this.
That sounds so low.
You know, whatever.
And so they see him as this like big womanizing stud. And as I'm watching it, it's like they allude to like Kirk having like a very active, you know, like sexual past, and he definitely flirts with aliens and things like that. But like he's also a very smart man. I mean, not to say that a person who flirts all the time cannot be a smart man, but I think
you set the hard line.
Yeah, I did right there. Whoops. Send your hate mail to fanroulette Gmail. But yeah, like I think people misremember Kirk and they just think of him as this like macho womanizer, but like he's incredibly smart and he's well read and he's a very smart tactical person. Picard is very interesting because like one of the reasons he chooses the first officer that he chooses is he doesn't want to go on away missions. And so like basically like if you look at Next Generation, they kind of split Kirk up into two characters. So it's like you have Picard, who's like very intelligent and well read and very smart, like good battle tactics and things like that.
Sure. And
then you have Riker, who is like very, you know, he's very ambitious and he is looking for big, bold adventures, and he's the one who will, you know, basically try to have sex with anything that has like a pulse and a, you know, pair of tits.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, listening audience. But yeah, God, I like them both for different reasons. I think at the moment, just because I'm still in Next Gen, I'm going to go with Kirk because I've sort of seen his full arc, and
sure.
I've been told that I'm getting right to the cusp of the good stuff in Next Gen.
Nice.
So who knows? Maybe my opinion will change by the time we get to the end. And then there will be people out there who say that the best captain is actually Sisko from Deep Space Nine, but that's another story for another day. I'm not even close to there yet. But yeah, so new Star Trek. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah,
so
I'd have to say so.
Let's talk about...
Are we going to get spoilery on this one?
Yeah, so we're probably going to get a little bit spoilery. I wouldn't be surprised if we got a little spoilery here and there.
I'm sure I'll probably spill the beans about something. So if you haven't seen it, go right now.
Yeah.
I know CBS Online or whatever is doing a free trial of their streaming service.
Okay.
You can get... There's a week-long service with, like, limited ads. I don't know what that means. I just did the one that was 2 days, because I just really wanted to watch these first 2 episodes to get a gauge on it.
Yeah. So
they're doing a thing right now. So just go on CBS streaming, and they have, like, a deal going on where you can try it for free.
Sure. And keep in mind, when we say spoilers, this is just for the first 2 episodes, because as of recording, this is all that's been out at the moment. So, Star Trek Discovery takes place about 10 years before the original series takes place. And it is the reigniting of the war between the Federation, the United Federation of Planets, of which Starfleet is kind of the military arm, and Discovery, like the exploration arm of that organization, and the Klingon Empire, who was initially like villains in sort of a Cold War standoff between the Empire, the Klingon Empire, and the Federation of Planets, and then as time goes on, they become kind of reluctant. They become allies, and there's, you know, always like gentle ribbing of the fact that there's like a little bit of animosity there, and it kind of evolves from that point as well. But this is 10 years before, and so it starts off, the Klingon Empire is shattered.
Yes.
Into like 24 separate houses, and then you have the Federation, which is flying around and doing their mission of finding, you know, peaceful planets, trying to bring people into the fold of their new governmental order. And so this is very much the early days where it's finding planets and sitting down and hashing out treaties and bringing people into the fold.
So you say that.
Yes.
But I feel like the first episode doesn't capture that very well.
And I would agree with that.
I think, so the first scene, and I'm just going to dive right into it.
Yeah, go for it.
From a guy who doesn't know anything about Star Trek. Because the more you tell me, I'm going to be like, oh, I get these things now. So I'm going to stop you before you add any more information to my collective noggin.
Sure. So
when I watched this...
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I knew what a Klingon was.
Yes.
I didn't know what they looked like.
Okay.
So the first scene is the Klingons all like, you know, there's this new super Klingon guy who's like kind of a religious zealot, and he's trying to basically win over the other houses to basically join together and start this war against the Federation. Had no idea. I was sitting there and I was like, what are these, the Borg? I've heard of those guys. Maybe it's the Borg. I know it wasn't a Vulcan because I saw the movie.
Okay, yeah.
But beyond that, I was like, who are these people? They got a cool language.
Sure.
And it seemed really cohesive for like a fake made up language.
Yes.
I was very surprised at like, I mean, I'm not a linguist by any means, but
sure.
it was real enough where I was like, oh this could pass.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that like Klingons showed up for about like 5 minutes in Star Trek Into Darkness. And from what I've heard, this kind of new design is kind of a combination of the Next Generation design and that movie design. If you're ever to go back and watch the original series, Klingons, like, you can tell that Gene Roddenberry wanted Klingons to look way different. He probably wanted them to have those facial, like
those super ridges on
those ridges on their foreheads and through their heads and stuff like that. And you could just tell that he wasn't given the budget for it. So if you watch the 60s, like, the Klingons are basically just dudes in lots of bronzer. It's just like, hey, Gene, it's like, what is it? It's like, you know how you wanted your cool alien bad guys to have those cool face ridges? He's like, yeah, did you do it? He's like, no, but we did get a really great deal on bronzer. And he was like, all right, we'll roll with it. And so when you get to the movies and, you know, they have more budget and things like that, it adds the spines and things like that. And then by the time you get to Next Generation, that's just kind of become the standard Klingon design. Like, the Klingons looked like that from basically the motion picture onward. And now it's just, you know, I think the things are like the blending is a lot nicer. And then...
I mean, they look dope in this show.
Yeah, they looked really nice. And then I think the one thing that was a little bit different was just like the aesthetic of their ships and things like that. Where if you watch the Next Generation, like, anytime you're on a Klingon ship, there's a lot of red lighting, which is kind of true with Discovery.
Okay.
Not quite as harsh red lighting as they did on Next Generation, but one of the things I thought was really cool about the Discovery design was everything about their, like, uniforms, their costume designs, their ships was, like, very harshly, like, rigid and geometric, but it was very beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, that dude who fights Michael on the outside of the ship, his armor is just this, like, beautiful, like, gold inlaid, like, diamond patterns.
Yeah.
Everything on this show looked amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
I will say that from a guy who knows nothing or knows very little about Star Trek, everything looked pretty legit.
Yeah, everything
like,
looked...
Nothing really felt there's a couple of design things, and it's probably from like the original Star Trek and stuff, where I was kind of like, that looks kind of silly, but like beyond those couple things, it's pretty dope.
Out of curiosity, what?
So there's a scene where they show off the Federation blaster pistol, and it literally, the phaser, whatever you want to call it, and it literally looks like a handle with a TV remote like taped to the top of it, like just in design, because it's like a big brick on top of.
Yep.
And I was trying to in my head be like, all right, why would you make a weapon that looked like this? Because it hangs off the back of the hand a lot, and there's like dials and stuff on the top of it to probably set it to different modes or whatever.
So that's important, because as far as I'm aware, phasers have 2 modes, which is stun and kill.
Okay.
And like 95% of the time, you set your phasers to stun.
Okay.
Because the Federation is in theory, a pacifist organization.
Right.
Like, they are trying to either immobilize or in some way... They're trying to immobilize, they're not trying to destroy.
Right.
So it's always a big sort of plot point where it's, if you're watching a show and they say set phasers to kill, like, you know that shit's getting real because they're not trying to find the peaceful solution out of this anymore.
Right.
They are aware that this is a situation in which we might have to kill another entity.
Well, knowing that now, and this is a super spoiler for episode 2.
Yes.
So, again, pause, watch all this shit first, and then come back. Have you watched it? Are you sure?
Are you sure?
Do it. Watch it one more time.
Yeah.
Okay,
go back and watch it again. Yeah.
We're back now. So, originally, when they use those... their phasers, like, there's a little blue light on the back of them.
Yes.
And in that final scene in the second episode where she blasts the one Klingon who's kind of the
de facto leader.
Yeah, the de facto leader, it's red.
Yes.
Which, I don't know, it was something just about the color change when she switches and, like, the intensity of that scene just shoots up to 20. It was very intense, so I think they did a really good job at, like, making that whole scene, like, with her switching the phaser to kill.
Yeah.
And, like, there's just this giant hole, or not giant, but there's, like, a hole through his chest.
Oh, it's a pretty decent-sized hole for the size of the weapon that she's firing.
Right. So they did a really good job at making, the idea of killing someone pretty severe.
Yes, and there's a lot of weight to that decision as well. Especially because, she just watched her, captain die and things like that. But I know one of the things that a lot of people have been nitpicking about the show. Okay. And it's, I guess, if I were a younger man or a man who had, maybe grown up with Star Trek, although it really probably wouldn't have bugged me even then, a lot of people talk about how different the technology looks. Which is that classic example of...
doing a prequel with better tech.
Yeah. So it's like everything, they have like, touch, they have like screens and holograms and things like that. I don't really care. I really don't, because you're like, having just a wall of buttons. Like, part of me understands it, but part of me is just like, whatever, I don't really care. Like...
See, and that's the thing. When they did it with Star Wars, like, it felt so fake.
Yeah.
But I think the thing for this one is it felt okay. Like, it didn't feel like they were all just sitting in green screens, and it felt very, like, fake. Like, it... For what it's worth, I felt like when I was watching it that they were in a ship.
Yeah, for sure.
Doing their thing, instead of just knowing that, like, everything's a green screen or everything's just too way over the top. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, granted, I wasn't I didn't watch the original Star Trek.
Sure.
The older shows, and maybe I'll get around to it if I ever have time.
Yeah, I mean, it's an investment. It's an investment in time. Yeah,
because I was looking, so the CBS streaming service has all of the Star Treks on it.
Oh, cool.
And it tells you how many episodes are in each one. And I was like, oh boy, that is quite an investment to get through, just to get through the original series and the Next Generation. Mm-hmm. But then they have like Deep Space Nine and all those other ones.
Well, and I think the other thing too is with those older shows as well. One of the not necessarily struggles that I find myself having with it is it's episodic television,
right?
Which is just something that we're not used to anymore. This is a thing that doesn't really exist outside of, like, police procedurals and some sitcoms. But the idea of each episode is its own isolated story because, oh, it's Wednesday and you forgot that Star Trek is on. Oh no, I guess you lost last week's episode and you don't have any idea where anyone is in the plot anymore.
Right.
Every episode is a self-contained thing, and they'll drop Easter eggs or they'll drop like a bigger, broader story. So it's like, they introduce the Borg and you'll be like, oh, okay, and like when they show up again, it's like, oh, don't you remember that they introduced them like last season,
right?
Things like that. But because of that, there's never really that desire to binge it, which is not an attack against the show by any means.
No.
I find myself having like particular like Star Trek days where it's like I'm just really in the mood for Star Trek, and then I can go for like weeks at a time without watching it.
Sure.
And so that's kind of what makes old Trek like an investment, is just this fact that we're so used to a certain kind of television of week by week, storytelling with that every episode ends with that cliffhanger, and I gotta watch next week's episode, because if I don't watch next week's episode, I won't know how this plot resolves. It's like every single Star Trek episode, with the exception of, I guess, with the Next Generation and I guess Deep Space Nine season finales, every story is wrapped up in a nice little bow, and you put it on the shelf, and then next week, new adventure, new conflict, new alien race, then they resolve that one, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
But yeah, that was a bit of a tangent, but suffice to say that, it's an investment, and a lot of our tech we can kind of like thank Star Trek for, especially like if you look at like the old flip phones.
Yeah.
That's very much feels like the the communicators,
right,
that they have. That was coming out kind of during like peak modern aesthetic and like sci-fi aesthetic, but there's a lot of things out there that like we can thank Trek for, like basic designs and things like that. Like obviously their stuff changed with the times as well. You watch Next Generation and they their computers look way different because it was the 80s, and now their computers look different,
right,
than they did in the 60s. Computers aren't big tubes anymore, things like that.
What? They're not a series of tubes?
Nope, no series of tubes is this year.
Damn it.
Sorry, Alaska. But yeah. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting because everything just looks so cool.
It looks amazing.
I don't mind it because hey, this is like it or not, this is what the new future looks like. Like you're always trying to shoot for something aspirational, and I understand why they set the story where they did, because I think people kind of like, I'm sure that the show creators had a desire to see the Klingons as antagonists again.
Sure.
Not as reluctant friends or things like that.
Sure.
So this is a good example, or this is a good place to start it, because this is the start of that big galactic war that was still kind of sort of going on when Kirk and Spock and Bones were doing their thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that at some level we as a viewing audience desire like conflict, and since a lot of TV nowadays is these big kind of stories that aren't, it's not episodic anymore. We don't have shows that at the end of the episode it ties everything up in a neat bow, so in case you miss next week's episode, like, you're okay. I think they needed to place it somewhere where there might be a overarching story. Maybe not every episode is like, this is all just one giant story being told by, the first officer, captain, whoever the story might be being told from.
Yeah.
But I think we crave conflict. So I think that's another good reason why they decided to choose here within the timeline, instead of being like, we're at peace, so we're just going to go hang out at different planets, because I feel like a large majority of the audience might not be interested.
Yeah.
And you have to sell, like, unfortunately, you have to kind of sell for both fans and a major audience, because otherwise you're kind of excluding a group of people simply because they didn't watch Star Trek, and I don't think that's fair either way.
Exactly, I would agree with that. And it's always it's like that idea of, oh, you didn't read the book, then why are you sitting here? And if you had read this ancillary book, then this movie would make more sense. It's like you have to tell a story that's attainable to everyone.
Right.
So that's a good point. But yeah, want to move on and talk a little bit about the characters?
Absolutely.
Cool. So at the very least, what appears to be the protagonist at the end of the first two episodes is our character named Michael Burham, something like that.
Yeah, the last name might be wrong, but
sure.
She's I don't know what the Star Trek term for it is, but like second in command.
Yeah, she's the first officer. Which is often referred to as like the number one of the ship. It's important to note that a lot of people who were writing for the original Star Trek series, a lot of them had naval backgrounds, which is why Starfleet feels very much like the Navy in space. So yeah, so like a lot of the stuff, like some of the alerts are similar to alerts that you would have on like a
Navy ship,
and like a submarine or things like that. But Michael is a super interesting idea that I'm very excited to see more about, because she is a human that was raised on Vulcan.
And according to the show, she's the first human,
yes,
to be raised on Vulcan.
Yeah.
So are they coming from a guy who doesn't know a whole lot?
Sure.
Are they trying to combine Kirk and Spock into like maybe one kind of maybe take some bits of Spock,
sure,
keep like the Vulcan logical stuff, but merge them into one character, and boom, that's what we're getting? Or
it's possible, and it's interesting that she's the protagonist, or she at least appears to be the protagonist after these first couple of episodes,
right?
Because one of the interesting things about Spock is, in a lot of ways, her character is almost like an inverse of Spock, because Spock is half human and half Vulcan.
Okay.
And so one of the big things about Spock's character is he's trying to keep his like emotions
in check.
And so have you ever heard of the Worf principle from Next Generation?
Nope.
So there's this kind of like running gag in Next Generation, this is going to pay off, I promise, called the Worf principle, which is basically Worf is the Klingon's security officer on the Enterprise, and anytime you're trying to establish like a threat, you have that threat kick Worf's ass. So Worf will get like knocked out, and so basically what it's doing is it's trying to establish that this thing is a threat because it defeated the biggest, beefiest dude on your crew.
Okay.
And what the joke becomes is Worf actually that strong? Because if everything can defeat him, then like what's to say that he just wasn't a weak guy who like looked pretty strong? Now, if you go to the original series, anytime you wanted to like establish a threat of an alien culture, the first thing that they would do is they would do something to Spock to make him embrace his human emotions.
Okay.
So like there's an episode where they're going around on this planet, and Spock gets a flower sprays its like spores in his face, and the flowers make him act human. This happens quite a few times during the run of the show. So he's always struggling with that human side of him and that human emotion. And so the interesting thing with Michael is that she is raised Vulcan, but she's very much a human to her core.
Right.
And so it's like, how do you balance and rectify these ideals of logic is key, logic is king. Before logic, we were like a savage race of barbarians. She's fully human, and she was being tried to raise in this society, which clearly affects her, because like she's trying really hard to be logical, but as soon as she sees even an ounce of a threat, she's very excited to fight or to get aggressive or things like that. And so I think it's interesting just because she's trying very hard to live up to these Vulcan ideals, but it's clear that it's impacted her in a deeper way.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because this is the first time we're seeing something like this in Star Trek as far as I'm aware. Because there was an interesting article that either my friend referenced or he might have written that every Star Trek needs its Spock. You need to have a character who's like an alien other who observes the workings of the human. If you go through all the shows, every show has its like quote unquote Spock, who is like the raw logic pragmatist character who kind of puts it up to a glass. What happens when that character is a little bit of both? And who knows, maybe she's not the Spock. Maybe Saru is the Spock of this
Yeah, I was
going
to say, I feel like if that's the case, like every Star Trek needs its more logical companion to see things without the human interaction or the human element. Yeah, I think Saru, which is a character I'm sure we'll talk about in quite detail, is that person.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's just kind of fascinating to watch this character try to come to terms with this.
Yeah.
Because I assume it's not easy.
No.
And she clearly doesn't do a fantastic job with it.
Right.
Because she tries to mutiny within the first 40 minutes.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
And becomes a fugitive. Well,
no, not really.
Not a fugitive, but she is definitely imprisoned.
Yes.
By the end of the second. I mean, they
Big
imply at some point she might become a fugitive, or something happens where like people treat her like a prisoner, even though she's like part of another crew or something, based on like their weird like, here's what's going to happen for the rest of the season.
Yeah, coming up this season on Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah. So it's interesting already because they showed her in the first like 5 minutes as this, she's logical and brash.
Yes.
All at the same time, because she's frustrated that they're stuck on this desert planet for longer than she would like. And then they have this really, like, logical conversation about what they'd do if they were stuck on that planet for, like, 80-some years because of this weird storm that's happening. So it's weird seeing her jump from being this incredibly logical, you know, the Vulcan side of her, and then seeing how, when things don't go her way, how quickly she kind of takes on those human elements.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting.
And you know, I guess now that I'm thinking about that sequence too, it shows that maybe her trying to be super Vulcan has removed a little bit of her human ingenuity.
Okay.
Because the captain is walking around in a circle to sort of create like the O of an SOS, basically.
Yeah.
Like that's a very human response, but her brashness isn't necessarily leading her to think outside the box like she might have if she was pure human, or if she was raised human.
Yeah, it's definitely going to raise interesting... I think it's going to raise interesting situations.
Yeah.
Because I feel like she is, at least according to these first 2 episodes, it might change, but she's short-tempered when things don't go her way, and that kind of puts her in, like, that tunnel vision.
Yes.
Like, her, just the human in her just, like, explodes in full force.
Which is why I'm hoping that, you know, in the rest of the season, she's not super high up in a position of power.
Yeah, that could be very,
Well, it's interesting, too, because I think we very rarely see Star Trek from the point of view of someone who isn't on the bridge, like, 95% of the time.
Well, because the original one, I assume Kirk is the one that kind of gets the spotlight for the most part.
Yeah, so there's a big idea in the original Star Trek of the Freudian trio.
Okay.
Which was the idea of you have your id, ego, and superego.
Okay.
And so one is like represents the logic, one represents the emotional core, and one represents the humanity. And so Kirk is the spotlight, but like the reason he would have like Bones and Spock on either side is like you have situation, Spock would give you the logical answer, you know, 15 people have to, you know, perhaps 15 people have to perish for us to get out of this situation. And then you'd have Bones who would say, you know, damn that, we have to do whatever we can to get out of here with all of our people. And then Spock will say, if we get out of here with all of our people, and so it would be like, you know, this little banter back and forth, and then eventually Kirk would have to come to a decision.
Okay.
Kind of idea like that. And I think, you know, that might be another thing that I'm curious about with the show, which is, I don't think we necessarily have gotten a good dynamic of the inner working banter of the crews.
Right, so...
Especially because it seems like they're just reestablishing it at, like, they're, like, turning the page to page 1.
Right, so the first 2 episodes, to give you the too long didn't watch situation.
If you get this far, bad person.
Right, pause, watch it again. I don't know how many times I can say this, but pause, watch it, come back. they establish that she's kind of first in command.
Yeah.
They get into a situation with the Klingons. She starts a mutiny because she finds out that the only way to handle this Klingon stuff is through violence.
Yes.
Because that's how the Vulcans did it.
If you show force, the Klingons will respect you, and if you threaten force from that point onward, they won't attack, but they'll be like, okay, these people get what's happening. Right,
because the Klingons, at least from what I've seen so far, they're very they're all about, like, honor.
Yes.
And being, like, almost like a pure race of Klingon. Because they kind of get into some, like, there's, like, a Klingon in part of the show who's unfortunately a different color from the rest of the Klingons. Because all the Klingons seem to be this kind of, like, charcoal color.
Yeah.
And there's this one that's kind of like an ivory color.
It's an albino.
An albino.
I think they specifically call him albino.
Okay, I couldn't remember if they actually did call him out on it, and they call him like an unpure Klingon and like kind of talk shit about him. So in the sense, getting off tangent, the first in command tries to lead a mutiny to show force to attack this ship so that the Klingons will be like, all right, we get it, like you're a badass, we're not gonna deal with this right now. But it all kind of plays into the Klingons' plan a little bit. And so what ends up happening at the kind of the end of episode 2 is her ship basically almost gets destroyed. They find a very clever way to get rid of the last Klingon ship that's there, and then she gets charged for mutiny. And then they kind of lead us into she's going to be on a new ship, but everyone knows her to be like, oh, you're the dirtbag that started a mutiny and got the captain killed.
Yes. Yeah. And a very respected captain at that. And an admiral.
Right. So like actually, a very important person in the fleet.
Lots of stuff went down in this conflict. And so, yeah.
And I think that's going to be interesting because now we don't know what the dynamic is.
Exactly.
They kind of established that Saru is, I think he's going to be the logical part of this, but he's a bit paranoid, so I don't know.
And so this is really fascinating to me because, like, in a lot of ways, like, Saru feels like a coward Klingon.
Yeah, I guess I can see that.
In that it's like his whole life and his whole species' purpose is about self-preservation.
Okay.
And some equate it to cowardice.
Sure.
Which I think, in a lot of ways. So, like, the Klingons are all about, like, honor and dying with honor, and it is honorable to die with one ship, or it is honorable to die in battle. And, there's lines in Next Generation where this one Klingon is ashamed of his father because his father died in his home as an old man. And he's like, why are you embarrassed about that? He's like, because he should have died in battle, like an honorable, good Klingon. Whereas it's like, for Saru's people, it's like, if you die anyway other than in your home, in your bed,
at an old age,
you are probably like a bad, whatever the name of his race is.
Bad boy.
And so, yeah, I think he'll probably prove to be the logical one, but like maybe logical to a not productive all the time place. I don't know. Maybe it's
almost
good.
Logical to a fault.
Maybe it's good. Maybe like he's there to temper Michael and things like that. But
then there's also the new captain that they only show in like kind of previews where he's like, I want to bring Michael on even though she's a felon or whatever you would call that. So, and we've only seen him in a couple of like kind of action shots, and I think he's maybe said at most 2 sentences.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's like, it almost feels like they're just like episode 3 is just going to be another pilot.
Which to me is unfortunate because don't get me wrong, the pilot was very good.
Yes,
but it was also slow.
Okay.
There was a lot of. Because they had to build up the Klingons for people like me who thought it was a Borg, because I'm an idiot.
See, here's the thing, though. I loved everything about the Klingons.
I do too.
So cool.
But there were, like, for me, so the back end of episode 1 is a lot of tension between the Federation and the Klingons, because they're, like, at basically a standoff.
Yes.
Because
and then she nerve pinches her captain.
Right. So there's just a lot of tension, and then like the only one part that kind of from what I understand is kind of what Star Trek is supposed to be was in that first 10 minutes of the episode.
Yeah, and then there's a part in episode 2 that really cut to the core of Star Trek as well, in my opinion.
What part was that?
So the first 10 minutes, obviously, but in episode 2, there's that scene where she's sitting in the brig,
Mm-hmm.
and a bridge officer stumbles into the brig area.
Okay.
And
I know what you're talking about.
She's like, "Why aren't you at the doctor?" And he's like, "I don't know what we're doing here. We're supposed to be explorers. We're supposed to be diplomats. We're supposed to be X. We're supposed to be Y. I don't know why we're here. I don't know what we're doing." And then he dies.
Very specifically because the hull
the
gets
hull
ripped off
of
where he is, and he just flies into space.
The hull gets completely destroyed. And she gets that really super cool containment field around her. And I feel like at that point, too, it's like, I'm hoping that line was there to show that they know.
Okay.
Like, the creators know.
Right, like this is just kind of to set things up.
Yeah.
But we'll get back to the cool exploring and...
Well, I don't even necessarily care if they get back to the cool exploring, but it's like, I don't want the show to be like 20 episodes of like war battle. Like,
right.
You can have the Klingon show up, every few episodes. You can have your space battles here or there, but I would prefer that this Klingon war be a backdrop to the story versus the story itself.
Yeah. From what I saw at the end of episode 2, the little spoiler teaser for the whole season, mm-hmm. It felt very much like the war with the Klingons was going to be the forefront instead of the backdrop.
Yeah.
I hope that's not the case. I hope I'm reading into it incorrectly, mm-hmm. because from what I've heard from you saying right now, making some opinions myself, and just from what I've heard from my fiance and from other people, mm-hmm. I like the idea of a show where we go to different planets and there's all this weird stuff, like alien stuff, and mm-hmm. they have some kind of challenge, and then on the backdrop is this war that's going on.
Yeah. And it's like you can have your space battles every now and then, although I'm sure that's expensive.
I'm sure.
And so one of the neat things about this pilot episode was it kind of did feel like a 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
It felt very cinematic and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just I would very much, and you can do a Star Trek. Hell, you could even do it like this, where it's like you have your episode, right, where it's like 30 minutes of exploration and working with a planet, or doing a discovery thing, or trying to find a wormhole or things like that, and then you can have the tag be like something Klingon war related, because obviously we're moving away from the episodic everything tied up with a nice bow. Those could just be your hook moments at the end of the episode, where it's like prepare the big gun for Callus, and it's like, oh shit, they're preparing the big gun for Callus, and it's like, next week on Star Trek Discovery, it's like, we gotta go, Captain. It's like, I have to go and sign the treaty papers. It's like, and it's like, things like that.
I mean, and there's a lot of shows that do that pretty well, mm-hmm. and I'm going to throw a show out here that I think did it pretty well for the first 4 seasons, but then kind of went in a spiral.
Okay.
Supernatural did a really good job at doing kind of a monster of the week kind of episodes, where the end of the episode was kind of like, oh, remember that underlying plot that's going on? That's the thing. So if they can harness that kind of level of here's that Star Trek, but remember there's this thing going on in the background.
Yeah.
And we'll spend the last, heck, it could even be the last 5 minutes of the episode.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be very long.
Honestly, that would be my ideal way for them to go forward.
Yeah. I
would like them to tell good classic Trek stories with the backdrop of a brewing, or of a, I guess not brewing, but
of a war.
The backdrop of this is a very real war that's going on, and I think you could do cool things too, because maybe it allows you to test the resolve of the Federation.
Yeah.
Things like that. I don't know, it's always cool to see the Federation kind of being tested, because if you're living in a future where everything's just kind of going great, as you said, Sometimes we like to have our conflicts. Don't get me wrong, sometimes when the world is getting me reeled down, so recording in 2017, that's a lot of time. It is really nice to turn on a television program where everyone is really smart and everyone like listens to one another and everyone is interested while at the same time being critical of other people's ideas, and the result is, you know, we all want the same common goal, and how do we achieve said goal?
Right.
A lot of times these are conversations that go through the prime directive.
Okay.
Which, do you know what the prime directive is? I'm going to guess no, because I don't think they ever actually brought it up in the movies.
No, they don't bring it up there, and I think they bring up a couple of Federation rules but I don't know what the prime directive is.
So the prime directive is this concept of you cannot use technology to alter the natural course of a planet.
Wait, they do that in like the first 15 minutes of the first episode. They literally take a bazooka and shoot it down a well to help this like race of bug people. So does the prime directive not take place in early Star Trek, or?
Well, so Michael says something about how it's like GO 1 or like General Order 1, and so it could potentially be that like the initial idea was we can do it as long as no one sees us doing it, because the prime directive exists for a couple of reasons.
Sure.
So reason one, let's say that you go down to a planet and the planet is still in their like Middle Ages.
Sure.
And you accidentally drop your phaser and in person one's camp, and so now people are jumping from the Middle Ages to like future tech.
Right.
That's altering the natural
course
of their society. A lot of episodes deal with the prime directive. And so then in Next Generation there's a really, really good episode where Data, the android, is like having a conversation with this little child who lives on this planet that's about to die, and they have this big conversation about the prime directive, and it goes down to like, okay, so let's say that we save her people because this is like a storm that has no control of their own. Well, we should do that because there's no... Okay, what's to stop us from interfering with a civil war that's been going on for thousands of years and we don't know anything about it, blah. And it ultimately ends up with the conversation where if we were to respond to every situation, to which Riker jumps in and says we would be gods, okay. Right? And so it's basically the concept of like what makes us smarter, or what makes us better, or what makes us quote unquote gods, that we can determine the fate of another species, of another planet. So yeah, I don't know, maybe the prime directive gets modified and honed during this period. So like maybe in the 10 years prior to Kirk and Spock, although I don't know if actually Enterprise refutes this or not because I haven't seen Enterprise yet. Maybe it's just the idea of you can interfere just so long as they don't see you using future tech.
Well, yeah, because that's what ends up happening in the second movie.
Into Darkness?
Yeah, Into Darkness. They're on a planet, and something bad's happening to it. I can't remember. It's been a long time. But they're on the planet, and one of the things they bring up is, like, we cannot let these people know that what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, maybe it's a modified version of the Prime Directive.
It's possible. I mean, lots of people violate the Prime Directive.
Right, and the thing is they ended up violating it at the end. Like, they don't know that they did, but somebody sees the Enterprise fly off. Okay. And so they, like, the first thing you see is someone, like, carves in the Enterprise, like, ship, like, into, like, stone or something.
Sure. And so basically, like, yeah, that's one of the things, too, where it's something I'm curious to see where they go for.
Well, and that happens in the first 15 minutes as well.
Yes.
They get caught doing it.
They do, don't they?
Yeah, the weird shellfish-looking people.
Yes.
Like the one guy, he gets up to the well, because the whole point was they were going to kind of give them their water supply back because there was some, like, earthquake or some shit. I don't know. So they blow it up with a bazooka, and some people have shown up to the well because the well explodes with water. And he looks at the two, Michael and the captain, who are leaving the area. I mean, I don't think he ever does or, like, the creature never ends up coming back or anything. But
sure.
Like,
well, not yet, at least.
Right, sure. I bet there will be another time for it, but... Yeah, he sees them and then kind of goes back to, consuming this water. And so, I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about this Prime Directive, or maybe maybe it'll get explained later.
Yeah.
God, we did go on quite a path. Prime Directive, Jesus. We were on a character conversation about Michael, and it really just went off tangent from there.
Well, I think we're talking about the original philosophy of Trek and things like that.
Yeah. But we jumped off of characters into that.
Yes.
But we only really talked about Michael.
Yeah, okay.
So I don't know if you wanted to go back to some of the other new characters they
we were talking a little bit about Saru, too.
Yeah.
Weren't we? Which, like, as far as I'm concerned, is really the only other main character they established.
Yeah, because they established the captain, but fun fact, she's dead at the end of episode 2.
She dies at the end of episode 2. So Saru is great. He, like I said, he's like a coward Klingon.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And one of the most exciting things about Saru, and I'm not going to act like I knew this before yesterday when I watched the episode, is he's played by possibly one of the greatest actors that you know and never have heard of, named Doug Jones, who is basically one of Guillermo del Toro's muses. In a lot of ways, basically anytime you have a cool, like, prosthetic creature or monster in a movie, he has played it from the looks of his IMDb page. He was Ape Sapien in both of the Hellboy movies. He was Pan and the Pale Man in Pan's Labyrinth. He is in the new Guillermo del Toro movie about the deaf woman who falls in love with
the fish man,
reptile man. He's the reptile man.
Oh, I'm sorry, reptile man.
I think it says amphibian man. I don't know. I call it an Ape Sapien origin story, and it makes my friend angry. And he's been in a lot of things, and it's really exciting to see him do work with actual lines and such, because he really sells it.
Nice.
I'm enjoying his character. He's probably the funniest character in this pilot. He has it could just be a combination of delivery and the things he's saying, but everything he was saying was always very short and snappy.
Yeah.
He seemed to have some sense of sarcasm, which I liked. I thought that was fun. Yeah, he was an interesting character. And then another character who I know, according to the IMDb page, is going to keep showing up is the ship's doctor, who was played by the actor who played Jonathan on 30 Rock, who is Jack's assistant. I love that guy. He's a good actor. I'm excited to see him in this. Yeah. Any other characters that stand out that you'd like to talk about? Other than Sarek, being a contender for, worst dad character. But anyway, moving on.
Honestly, those are kind of the two that really stood out. Yeah. Some people, everyone kind of did a really good job of, their thing.
Sure.
But it's unfortunate that in 2 episodes they really only kind of tackled 3 characters, and one of them dies at the end of episode 2. Mm-hmm. So it was I think it was unfortunate, but at the same time I think it would have dragged on even longer to try to get the rest of the crew
everyone their own little moments and characters.
Right. So I think for right now those are the 2 to watch. But I think everyone does a good job. I don't think there's even while watching it, especially TV shows, you can feel when someone kind of phoned it in.
Yeah.
But nobody did, as far as I'm concerned, for the show.
Another thing too, I'm just now realizing, maybe that's for a purpose where it seems like Saru's still around, at least based on this upcoming season on Star Trek Discovery. Maybe this whole thing was just to establish a level of animosity between the 2 of them that started off as kind of a friendly rivalry,
right?
And has now boiled into I want to trust you. I think he says this line straight up. It's I want to trust you, but you're unreliable, or you're a loose cannon, or something like that.
Right. Well, and I think it was also setting up for just everyone's opinion on Michael. Like
Yeah.
Because when she starts, she's got a clean record.
She's well respected.
Yeah, she's like 7 years of success on anything she's done.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, at the end of episode 2, she's
a convicted mutineer.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting, and they kind of imply that she somehow gets on another ship. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Now, one last thing. So this show was created by Brian Fuller.
Okay.
Who, due to some stuff, left the show. So I don't know how much he was involved in. Maybe it was just establishing characters and maybe writing the pilot and going from there. His name's still in the credits and such. But Brian Fuller is famous for, he did Hannibal, the NBC show that I have not watched and have been highly recommended to not watch because it would mess me up, something fierce. And then he did Pushing Daisies, which is like a very nice little cult comedy from the early 2000s.
Okay.
And then most recently he's done American Gods.
I still want to watch.
Which was on Stars. I've watched 95% of it. It's visually stunning. So the guy really understands the medium of television. He really understands the medium of visual storytelling, and I think that really came through with all the designs and sets like that. So even if he left early enough in the project, I still think we're going to see his little his marks on the program and the project.
Yeah,
which is exciting because he has a very good voice. He has a very good understanding of the medium, and it's really neat to see him doing something like Star Trek.
Nice.
So I guess the big question is, for a non-fan, non-fan's not the right phrase, I think.
A limited fan.
For a person who doesn't know that much about Star Trek and was kind of coming into this, not blind, but,
I mean, I came to this on a text message, being like, hey, we should watch this.
And
I was like, okay, I'm down.
Do you think that it was a pilot that was effective enough to keep you going on this show and or maybe allow you to branch out to other treks?
I think the first 2 episodes are.
Okay.
I don't know. I almost didn't watch episode 2, and I might have had a very different opinion on how I felt about the show had I not watched episode 2.
Fair.
They're about normal TV length. I mean, I'm sure with commercials and stuff, it's about an hour long, but
yeah,
I think it was about 40,
it's
45.
42 minutes.
Yeah,
an episode
a piece. So definitely give it. Because if you're like me, I was getting a little frustrated with the tension not going anywhere at the end of the episode. I just wanted it to I wanted things to hit that point. Not necessarily explode. The tension hit peak mass and just kind of throttled that line for a little longer than I wanted. It was very tense, and the very beginning of the show was a lot of trying to explain what was going on.
Sure.
So it was very intense, but not a lot happened.
Okay.
But
yeah.
But watching both, I loved it.
Sure.
So I definitely am looking forward to. I don't know if I'll keep my subscription to the streaming thing, but I might down the road go back and watch them, kind of binge the rest of it.
Cool.
So yeah, I think it's definitely worth a watch for a not so inclined Trekkie, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
It's definitely worth a watch.
Okay.
It definitely brings modern media to the Star Trek form.
Sure. Cool.
What about you? What about someone who's been on this road a time or two?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. Like I said, the visuals were stunning. That next time or this season on Star Trek Discovery got me excited about it. Like I said, I just think my big thing is I hope that the war is more of a backdrop to more classic Trek stuff, which is not to suggest that I want a whole series of episodic here's and there's, but I'd very much like it to be it's called Star Trek Discovery. I'd very much like for them to be trying to actively fulfill their role as a Federation ship while at the same time dealing with this conflict with the Klingons. If they could find a nice balance between the two of it, because this was very much like a war movie, which was cool, and it was neat to see, but it would also be nice to see them trying to still fulfill their roles, and who knows, maybe it's just as simple as a race to be the first to get to the various planets, things like that. Who knows? But if they can find that core of Trek and combine it with the new slick aesthetics and the interesting new characters, then I'll be here for it. I'm on board. So
yeah,
I'm excited. Good to see it back.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. If you want to follow us, or if this is your first episode of Fandom Roulette and you'd like to see more of the nerd stuff we talk about, you can find us on fandomroulette.com, where we will be posting all of our episodes. It's a variety podcast. We talk about video games, role-playing games, history, and then this kind of falls into our grab bag episode, where we just talk about fandoms in general, different new things that are coming out that fall into the mold. So yeah, that's where you'll find our episode list. If you want to reach out to us, talk to us, let us know how you feel about this episode. Maybe you agree, maybe you horribly disagree. That's a possibility. You can tweet at us at fandomr_podcast. That's our Twitter handle. Our SoundCloud, which is where we upload all of our stuff, it's Fandom Roulette. Should be easy to find. And then our email, if you'd rather send us a private message, maybe something you'd like to talk to us about, maybe you just want to give us some hopefully nice words.
Yeah.
You can email us at fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah.
We're also looking for, potential questions. We would like to, down the road, when our fan base is large enough, to end episodes with maybe questions from the fans, or how we feel about things. And I know as this evolves and progresses, I'd like to do, maybe suggestions for video games that I can play, so that I can talk about them on the podcast. Or, for role-playing games, let me know what kind of sick, twisted stuff that you want me to throw my players, one of them being another pod host.
Do those. Don't do those ones, though.
So, yeah, you can send that our way.
Yeah. So, thank you for listening to the episode. Signing off, I'm Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Super nerdy.